So with that, I will turn this over to Jamie, and I'm going to move the speaker over towards her a little bit. Hopefully you can hear her. And go right on ahead.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamie Schreiner. I am CEDAM's Executive Director, as Rachel let you know. Thanks for joining in this afternoon. I'm going to apologize in advance. I am not used to doing webinars. I'm used to speaking in front of a group and walking around and using my hands and interacting with all of you, so this is a little bit of a different situation for me. So please bear with me as we go through. I think you all have the ability to type questions. I think you're muted now. So if you have any questions, I would encourage you to type them, and I will do my best, and maybe Rachel can watch as well to see if they pop up, and we will stop and try to address them as we go on, as opposed to just normally having a conversation about them, which is what I would normally do with you. So we'll go ahead and dive in. So all of you are involved with CEDAM, which is the Community Economic Development Association of Michigan. We have been around since 1998. We're actually turning 20 this year. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we have generally between 250 and 275 members all across the state of Michigan. So down from the southern border all the way up to northern Michigan near Calumet. So we were started initially as an organization to provide training to entities who provided affordable housing, or CHODOs, Community Housing Development Organizations. And I think that some of you are working with CHODOs potentially, or if not, will be, and we'll talk a little bit more about affordable housing here in a few minutes. But we were started to help to provide training and technical assistance for those organizations. And very quickly, discovered that in order for the affordable housing developments across the state to be successful, the people who were living in them needed to be successful and needed to have the many supports around them, which is another one of the pieces that many of you are working on. So today, what CEDAM does is we provide a number of resources for our members all across the state. We provide training, technical assistance, policy advocacy, and pretty much anything that our members ask of us. So we're a relatively small organization. We're big enough to get things done, but not so big like state government that we're onerous. We generally have about 10 full-time people here. And what we do is we coordinate a number of task forces and coalitions that work on very specific topics, like the Michigan Economic Impact Coalition, or Michigan Communities for Financial Empowerment, that are dealing with different financial empowerment issues that many of you are working on. We used to have the Michigan Foreclosure Task Force, and in our AmeriCorps program was the Michigan Foreclosure Prevention Corps. We have the Michigan Rural Council, that our VISTA program, many of you are involved there. And then, as you know, today we have both our AmeriCorps and VISTA members on the phone. And just as a little bit of a background on me, I have been at CEDAM now, I'm heading into 8 years, which is a long time to be at one job. My background is I very, very briefly worked for the state at the State Housing Development Authority, but I worked for the Main Street program. So for those of you VISTA members who are working with Main Street programs, I actually worked for the state's coordinating program, went all across the state working with different programs, providing them training and technical assistance. And prior to that, I actually ran a local Main Street program, the Old Town Commercial Association, and I'm currently their board chair. So, and I'm very involved as a volunteer there. And I guess with that, we will dive on into what is community economic development. So, community economic development is this big thing. A lot of people you'll hear say community development or economic development. And community development is often considered to be kind of the warm, fuzzy piece. And economic development is kind of often considered to be that really hard, we've got to make money, bring it in a factory piece. And really, you want to kind of combine the two together, and you want community economic development, because the two truly work hand in hand. You need to have the jobs in the community, but you need to have the people working in them. You want to have things that help bring in money into the community, help to provide resources, but you also want to be sure that the positions and the jobs that are there are long-term and sustainable, and that they're being good to the environment, and that ultimately that the positions are there, that they have a good solid wage. So there are all these different things that are in place. And so when we talk about community economic development, we're talking about a long-term sustainable process that shows up in a lot of different ways. So it can be, if you look at that illustration, that picture down below, this is a picture that we often use when we're talking to legislators, because we say community economic development and their eyes kind of glaze over. And for many of you, when you're probably talking to your parents or talking to family members and they say, what do you do? They probably have no idea what you actually do. I mean, I've told people in here, my dad, honestly, thinks that I don't get a paycheck because I work for a nonprofit, and he thinks that that means I don't make money. And I am absolutely serious when I say that, and I have been an administrator at a nonprofit for close to 15 years now. So ultimately, though, if you look at that illustration down below, when we talk about community economic development, sort of starting in the lower left-hand side, it could be affordable housing. When we say affordable housing, actually I guess the affordable housing is over to the right. We want to have a wide variety of housing. We want people to be able to choose where they live, and that affordable housing should be no more than 30% of their income. So they should be able to choose if they want to live in the city or in the country, if they want to live as I mentioned, in an urban or a rural area, if they want to live in a house or in an apartment. But ultimately that housing should be safe and affordable in a place where ultimately you would want to live as well. Community economic development could be neighborhood revitalization, where people are working on ultimately improving their neighborhood as a whole. We could be talking about financial empowerment issues, where we're working with individuals to help them improve their financial situation. Are people setting aside dollars for college? Do they have access to the education level that they want? It could be foreclosure mitigation that I know many of you have worked on. It could be food systems. Do they have access to safe and healthy food near them, or are they in a food desert? It could be downtown or neighborhood commercial district revitalization. We know now that many people ultimately want to move back into the cities. And when I say city, I don't mean like a big city often. It doesn't necessarily have to be Detroit or Grand Rapids or what we consider to be a really large city. It could be the four corners in their rural community, but ultimately where the post office, the grocery store, the bar, whatever, where the collection of businesses are, they may want to be in that area. It could be about placemaking, which is ultimately improving an area for the people who are first and foremost already there, and then looking at how we can attract new people in. We could be looking at arts and culture and the history of a community and how we continue to make it great. Looking at small business development. Often what brings back a number of small communities, and after a large factory moves out, is that the people who have been there for a long time think about the small business that they wanted to open and that they wanted to focus in on. And community economic development can be helping to provide them with resources through something called a CDFI, a Community Development Financial Institution, giving them small dollar loans, making investments in the community. And we also mentioned education. So it can be all of these very, very different things. Ultimately, it's taking a look at what's in your community and what your community needs. And every community needs something a little bit different. It can be very frustrating when you're trying to measure it and look at it from a statewide perspective, because those of us who, like at CEDAM, when we're working at a statewide level, we want to try to show the impact of community economic development on the entire state at once. And because it can be something very different, it means something extremely different from one community to the next. It's really hard to measure and find those right data sets and data points. So if any of you have any really good ideas on how to do this, let us know, because we have not figured it out yet in our 20 years. None of our national partners really have yet either. So really, community economic development is no different than traditional economic development, which is kind of chasing those factories, as I mentioned. But it's place-based. So what that means is you are focused in on a certain area. That area, and usually we'll say you're looking at your community. And you can define community however you decide to define it. It can be a neighborhood, it can be a city, it could be a county, although usually when you're starting to get that big it makes it a little bit more difficult. I know I'll refer back to my neighborhood. My neighborhood is pretty close to 9 blocks. So my whole world is 9 blocks. But it could be, I can also talk about, we're here in Lansing. I could talk about my community as Lansing as a whole, which then I'm talking about more of the greater Lansing region. So when we talk about place-based, think about that very, very specific place. It's people-focused. So we are also looking at not just dollar signs, which is more traditional economic development, but looking at the assets that we have in the community that are very, very much the people who are already there. And we want to create long-term sustainability for everyone who is there, not just new residents. And this is something that I want you to really, really stop to think about for a minute. That it's not just looking at new residents. Because many people will think, well, community economic development is just about bringing in all kinds of new people to fill up vacancies in neighborhoods. Or we had all these people move away, and now we want to start to fill up all these empty spots. Or we want people to come in and build a new development, and that'll help, revitalize the community. And that's great. Those are good things, but you want to stop and think about the people who are already there. Because community economic development is really looking at who has really stuck it out over the long haul. I mean, think about Michigan, and think about how we've had a lot of people who have moved away from Michigan. And now we're trying to get people back, and it's slowly working. But we don't want to just focus on those people who we're trying to recruit back. We want to really look at the people who have spent all their time and resources here and continue to say, I stayed here for a reason. It could have been maybe they couldn't afford to move. It could have been that they had family here. But it also could have been that they loved the state and they loved their community more than anything else, and they were going to do everything that they could to improve it. We want to listen to the folks who are already here and first and foremost make sure that they are happy before we're trying to look at what other people might want. And I would ask you guys now, does that make sense? Do you have any examples for me? But I can't. So, and when you're looking at your community too, and you're looking at your neighborhood, or however you define community, you want to look at the existing assets that are there already. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, people. People are the biggest asset that any community has. Because nothing is going to get done without people being there. You could have an amazing community with beautiful buildings and all kinds of incredible resources, but if there aren't any people there, what's the point? So you want people within your community. Buildings are a huge asset. Historic preservation, historic buildings that are in a community are a huge asset. The businesses within a community are a huge asset, and don't just look at the big businesses. I mean, big businesses are great. Everybody wants to be able to go to Meijer or, I won't use the W word. Family Dollar, yeah. Go to a store where they can pick up things that they need. But you also need those small businesses that really shape the flavor of your community. And so when somebody talks about, going into their community, they'll really talk about what maybe that small business might be or what that really unique business in the community might be. you want to talk about the history of your community, and the history that community has is a major asset. And the culture. What is the background and culture that your community has? Or any activities. I mean, what's the crazy, fun, bizarre, weird stuff that goes on? Because those are huge assets. And any organizations that are already there, or maybe have been there but left, but may have laid a great base for some of the activity that could be going on. And this is by no means a comprehensive list. So, why do community economic development? I'm going to tell you first a story. So this picture is from my neighborhood from, Alex, this is my, he's like a nephew. I think he was about 4 here. He is 13 now. So, so 9 years ago, maybe pushing 10 years ago, we built a playground in my neighborhood. And it was the first time we used something called Kaboom, that many of you have probably used Kaboom. And Kaboom, if you haven't used Kaboom, it's a really good resource. It's a great way to do things when you don't have a lot of money. You can build playground equipment and use volunteers to install the playground equipment, as opposed to having to pay for labor, professional labor, which saves you a ton of money. So my little nephew Alex here, we invited everybody in the neighborhood, if they invited, we strong-armed, begged, pleaded with them to come down and help, because we had a ton of work to do. And got everybody involved, including the kids in the neighborhood who were ultimately going to be using all this playground equipment. And what this did for them, most of the time we spent trying to keep my nephew Alex from falling into the river. Because what you see his dad, those are the legs behind Alex in this picture, that's his dad, Mike. Mike's about 6'5", a big guy, and very strong and used to working outside. So Mike did a ton of work on this. But what Alex did, now even that he's heading into being a teenager, what Alex did is he remembers building this, and this was his playground. And when he walks by with people, he will point out, I helped to build this playground. He will pick up trash. When he sees somebody messing with it, he will tell you, this is my playground. I did this, along with the other handful of kids who did the same thing. We let them put their hands in cement, the whole deal, and it started for them now being willing to volunteer from here on out and take ownership of their community and helping to set the stage for the future. So this is one, we're setting, again, looking at the assets we already have in the community, looking at the people who could help us get something done, looking at what we wanted to see happen. We needed a playground for the kids who were there, and we looked at how we could get it done with the people and the resources that we already had, and setting the stage for the future for long-term sustainability. So these are just some of the reasons to do community economic development. So again, as we mentioned, it's truly regular economic development. It's just place-based. So you're looking in, and I apologize too, these slides are super wordy. Normally I just give you pictures and tell you stories, but for those of you too who, I wanted you to have some reference points after this too. We're again focusing in on one specific area, and we really want to revitalize and bring in resources. I'm going to ask, I think somebody might need to mute their phone.
I'm muting you all.
The conference has been muted.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Blame whoever that was. You can still answer questions or ask questions in the chat box, and please do.
Yeah. Sorry about that. You want to empower the people who are already there. And so with community economic development too, sometimes people forget that they are personally a great resource within the community. They might not have a lot of money, they might not have a lot of time, but I can guarantee you they have something to offer their community. And oftentimes it's just reminding them that they have something to offer. It's just a matter of figuring out what exactly it is. Even 4-year-old Alex had in that picture had something to offer there. You're also embracing diversity of all types, age, background, gender, whatever the diversity may be, which ultimately creates a strong, vibrant community. And we know, too, from research that people want to live in communities that have diversity of all types. Nobody wants to walk down the street, well, maybe in Florida, the Villages, sorry, and see people who look well, and then they're driving a golf cart, but, see people who look exactly like them. But ultimately, our very, very strong, thriving communities are the communities where you walk down the street and you don't see people who look exactly like you. And those are the communities that, you go to a city, you go to larger areas, these are the areas that are thriving and truly coming back. And what community economic development also does, too, is it prevents displacement and fights gentrification, though. And although you'll hear people talk about gentrification quite a bit in Michigan, ultimately, so far we only have a couple of neighborhoods in Detroit that are truly facing gentrification. But what's really important for us to do right now is, as Michigan is coming back, we need to prepare ourselves to make sure that gentrification doesn't happen and that we're not ultimately displacing people. So when we're looking at community economic development, it's making sure that there's a place for everyone within a community. So we're planning for things moving forward. Oops. I'm having a little bit of a hard time with the mouse here too. So, and how community economic development actually started was, it started in the 60s and really, really took a strong foothold in the 70s. When people around started to recognize the need for equality, even when the government, although the government slowly started to pick up, in other areas of business did not. So when community economic development truly started to get a good foothold was when the Community Revitalization Act, or CRA, some of you have probably heard about CRA, and I think that you'll hear a little bit more in some of the later sessions, I'm imagining. And next week at your training, I think you're hearing from Jason Paulatier. Jason Paulatier is on CEDAM's board. Jason is a tremendous resource. Jason is a CRA officer for PNC Bank. Grill him on CRA and talk to him about this. But what CRA did is it attempted to make some type of reparations for redlining that went on. So banks would take money from people in the form of deposits and then not make loans to people in those exact same areas. So CRA sort of tried to make some repairs there with limited success. The Civil Rights Movement, the Fair Housing Act, and other anti-discrimination practices kind of started in the late 60s, early 70s, and that's when community development corporations, or CDCs, really started to pop up. So many of you, before I started to work at CEDAM, I had never heard the phrase CDC used to mean a community development corporation. I had worked at a vaccine manufacturer where it meant something completely different. And actually I've heard, I think, 3 different meanings for CDCs. But what it generally means when we're talking about it here is a community development corporation, which is typically a nonprofit organization that is doing some type of community-based economic development, or CED work. So it's pretty much the organizations that you are working for. What we're finding is CDC is becoming a slightly outdated term too, so sometimes organizations are called community development organizations, or CDOs, or some other types of terms. But that's something that, as you're hearing CED work or community economic development work, you'll often hear CDCs doing CED. So something.
Gary has a question. He says, are CDCs recognized from an organization deeming themselves ones, or do they have certifications in place? That's a good question. I don't know the answer.
There are some designations for organizations, like you could be a CHODO, a Community Housing Development Organization, and you can get certain certifications. Many CDCs will get certain certifications. Usually CDCs have certain qualifications When you're applying for grants, people will ask if you are a CDC, and generally what they mean is, do you have people who represent your community on your board? So does your board look like your community? One. Do the people who are on your board live in your community? Do they have businesses in your community? Do they work in your community? Do they look like the people in your community? Are they, if you have all white men who are upper middle class and you are living in a very diverse census qualified community, generally organizations will say you are not truly a CDC. You may have people who can write a check and have no problem writing a check, which is great for a nonprofit, but you're not truly representing the people in your community. So usually, I haven't seen, Gary, a lot of, I think there used to be ways to truly recognize them, but most, like CEDAM in our bylaws, we expanded what the definition of a CDC is to include a lot of organizations. So I know we don't have a certification for a CDC, but usually it means, do you represent the people who live in your community? Does that work for you? All right, good deal. He said thank you. Okay. So community economic development 2 focuses in on the existing resources, both human or financial, knowing that people can be your biggest asset. So every neighborhood has people in them who they are the holders of the history of the community. And I would be willing to bet, we're starting to lose things in some of the newer neighborhoods, the way that homes are built where you don't have porches, where people are enclosing their front porches. You're starting to lose a little bit of the ability to communicate often with your neighbors. I lived in a newer neighborhood about 10 years ago, and it was one of the ones where the garage is kind of built to the front. You guys can't see my hand gestures here, sorry. But the garage is built to the front of the house. We had a teeny tiny front porch. It was a beautiful home that was on a lake, but it was definitely not the one that encouraged you to interact with your neighbors as people were walking by down the street. And it was in a neighborhood that did not have sidewalks. So you lose some of that interaction, but in a lot of traditional neighborhoods, you have porches, and you have people who sit on their porches, and they talk to the people as they walk by, and they have lived there for a long time. In the neighborhood that I grew up in, there was a couple who lived across the street from us that as teenagers, we hated it because they would tell my mom, much more so my younger sister who had parties and got in trouble. I was the good nerdy kid. But their names were Sophie and Jack. And Sophie and Jack could tell you, like we used to joke, that they could tell you the social security number of every person who pulled into our driveway and rattle that off to my mom. And they could tell you who had owned every house in the neighborhood and when, and how many kids they had, and what the history of the entire neighborhood was. And most neighborhoods have somebody like that, who they are a huge asset and can tell you what has gone on in a community. And it doesn't mean that they have a lot of money, but that is a major asset that you should not forget about. And when you're doing community economic development too, it's really important to build on the assets and the resources that are already there. So you don't want to try to come in as this shining knight who is going to save the community. That is the absolute last thing that you want to do. You want to make sure that you are working with everyone who is already there, because if not, I can almost guarantee you that you are going to be recreating some process that has already happened. People are going to look at you and shake their head and say, we've already tried that, that's already been done. If you had actually just sat down and spoken with someone, you would know. So think about the resources that are already in the community. It also looks at the past, the present, and potential community assets. Because every community has history, and I mean, history repeats itself. So, I pulled these slides this morning, and I was kind of going through, looking at the different pictures and thinking about, where we were in the 60s when the CRA Act initially started and civil rights movement started, and thinking about today where we're really not a whole lot further than where we were in the 60s in many ways. And so you need to really look at what the history of a community has been, because the history of a community truly can impact what your work is going to be. And should at a bare minimum frame the conversations that you will have. And if you don't know the history of a community and you go in and attempt to begin some work there, you could make some major, major missteps. So be sure that you look at that history. If you're working on doing a project in a community too, ultimately, community economic development will save you money, effort, and time. If somebody's looking at doing a physical development, community economic development is actually looking at resources that are already there and working with the people who are already there. I mentioned you're not just trying to recruit new people. You want to make sure that anything that's done is amenable to the people who are already there as well. And although many people may think, well, if we go to the neighborhood and we stop and we ask everyone what they think about a project, it's just going to take a ton of time. And you're going to get people who are going to say, well, no, we shouldn't do that. What we really need is this. And, and that may be the case. But ultimately what you need people to be able to, you need to listen to people. You need to listen to what the community wants, not just what you think they want or what you think they need. Truly listen to what they are. And it may mean that you need to go back and look at your project and start from square one and reframe it. But ultimately that will save you a ton of money and time in the long run, especially if people are looking at big housing developments or other things too. Because if they're just going in and doing what they think a community needs and wants without actually talking to the community, by the time it gets up in front of city council or in front of others, if they just have people who are standing there with pitchforks who are so angry because they haven't been involved in the process or had any type of dialogue at all, the developer is going to have to go back to square one anyhow. So it's best to start off talking to people within the community who ultimately can become their biggest allies by working with them. May take a little bit more time in the very beginning, but ultimately it's going to save a ton of time and resources. There are a couple of different things, different theories behind it. One is for community economic development. One's called asset-based community development, or ABCD. Do I know where those pictures were from? Where was I at? The black. I just Googled them. I will have to look. Don't copyright any of this stuff here. So, yeah.
The internet.
But they came from the internet, yes. How's that for an answer?
That works.
Yeah.
Disclaimer.
Yes. But asset-based community development is another theory that some of you may hear for community economic development. It's truly, again, just building on what's already there, doing research on existing assets, again, human and financial, and building upon them, knowing that you're a part of a team, and then organizing around what the current salient issues are within a community. So it's figuring out, what are the big issues in a community today, and how can we organize around them to help address them for the better of the entire community. So ultimately how you do it, so asset-based community development or community economic development, start off doing your research. And I'm sure all of you have done quite a bit of this when you started with your programs and when you came into your community. Figure out what organizations are already there and already exist. Are there different CDCs in the region? Are there schools? What are the different entities? Who are the big players? Are there developers? Is the local government great? Who today and who in the past was a major player? Because in that past one, I've mentioned history a couple of times. they might not even be there today, but some of their successes or errors can definitely stick around in a community. So you need to know what those are. Know what the neighborhood's issues are. Your organization may want to work on affordable housing, but you could go into a community and they could say, you know what, really we have enough housing. If we just need to tweak a little bit of things here. We have enough housing stock. We just need to do some repair work to it. But what we really need help with is there's a school that, our education system is broken. We need to fix that here. Find out what are the past successes, and then really try to build on them. So if there were some prior successes that you can really just jump on and grow from those, see if you can do that, and then look at what are those current opportunities to continue to grow from there. Reach out to those existing organizations that you found when you did your homework. Who are the other nonprofits? Is there a neighborhood watch? Do Sophie and Jack have other partners in crime with whom they're connected? Is there, some of you are young and might not have ever heard of something called a phone tree. But there used to be things that were called a phone tree or neighborhood Facebook pages or, other things along those lines. Black clubs, different faith-based organizations, sometimes churches, synagogues, mosques, temples. They are huge entities within a neighborhood, and really people in the neighborhood organize around them. How about the schools? Any other, could be the Scouts. It just could be the farmers market. It could be all of these different groups that may be in your neighborhood that you could reach out to and see what they're doing. And then get organized. Pull the neighbors in the different organizations and see what they want to have happen. Look at the current projects that everyone is working on, and then hold a community visioning session. So really a visioning session is you're asking the community, what do you want to see happen? Not here's what we're going to do for you, here's what we think you need to have, but truly, what do you want to see happen? And you want to make sure that people know that they're also invited too if you're doing a community visioning. Don't go to City Hall and post it at City Hall and think that you've now done your legal obligation and that's done. Go door to door and invite people. Introduce yourself. Talk about what you're doing. Put posters up in public places. Invite people in your community to actually create the posters. Use social media in many different forms. So, for those of you who I've met, you know that I'm in my 40s. I like Facebook. I feel like I'm too old for Twitter. Sometimes I remember to open up, what's the one with pictures? Instagram. See, I'm showing.
Snapchat.
No, definitely not Snapchat. Although my friends and I decided that they really need to create one called Snack Chat, where you just show pictures of the snacks that you're eating. So you can see the different age demographics that people have. Figure out all of the different means of social media, and also recognize that some people don't use social media. So also put notice in the different church or religious bulletins, school newsletters, and use word of mouth. The biggest thing is if you can turn to somebody and say, hey, Rachel, want to come with me to this community visioning? We could really use your input. It's really hard when you look at somebody and look them in the eye and say, I need your help. I want to help make this community better, but I need your help. It's really hard for them to say no. Remember that when you're looking for volunteers. Set a really great agenda and make sure you have an agenda. Let people know why they are there. And then make sure that everyone not only feels invited, but that they truly were invited and that they were welcome. And that means everyone. So even if you have the curmudgeon in the community who you know is going to shoot down every idea that you have, you still need to invite them. Because if you don't invite them, it is going to be 10 times worse. And ultimately, if you can invite them and listen to them, chances are they've got some good ideas in there. But something just happened where they, at some point, just were shot down, or something, something happened to dissuade them from wanting to be a help within the community. But at some point, they may end up coming over to your side. Hold it in an accessible space. So accessible means a lot of things. Make sure it's ADA accessible. Americans with Disability Act. So is it, can a wheelchair get in there? Can somebody with a walker get in there? Someone who is blind, can they maneuver around there? If it is in the evening, can people find it? Is there parking? Do you have food? Depending on your neighborhood, do you have cocktails? That sometimes gets people there too. Is there child care? Is there a playground for kids to do something? You may want to have it outside so parents can be watching and participating in the visioning while their kids are playing on the playground, and they can keep one eye on their kids too. And then you want to listen to what people say and then truly act on it. So some of those things that you can do too is you can hold a SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis is a really simple, easy measurement tool, or a visioning tool, not a measurement tool. So what SWOT stands for is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And what you do is you spend a few minutes and you focus in on each. And you ask people to talk about the strengths in their community, the weaknesses in their community, the opportunities to do better things in their community, and the threats that would prevent them from doing better things in their community. Oftentimes people will want to really focus in on the threats and the weaknesses and only talk about the bad things. Don't let them focus in on this. You may be coming into your community as a new person with new eyes, so at times you may have to bring up some things to help them, help kind of get the ball rolling for them. And don't forget that some of those strengths are people. It could be that, Ben makes a mean cheese dip, or, those are things that truly people don't think about, but could end up being a really good asset for something. So, and then asset mapping is another thing that's often used in community economic development too. It's looking at the assets that a community already has. So what's there? And again, you in your neighborhood may have very, very different ideas. So make sure traditional asset mapping often only looks at physical and economic assets, so businesses, rivers, buildings, highways, really those physical things that you can touch. But think about too, I would encourage you in your, as community economic developers, think about the people who should be included in there too. And then after you've gone through and done a community visioning, share the results with people. This is a huge error that people make all the time. And I will tell you, we do this in my neighborhood too, that we forget to tell people what the results were. We'll spend all this time working on things, and I watch this happen every day. You'll spend all this time and work and energy and then forget to tell, you'll tell 5 people, but not the broader, larger community. Look for common areas of interest and see where you might be able to have some quick wins. Build relationships and continue communication. You have to do this. Keep communicating with them. So whether it is with an e-blast, hopefully inviting them to regular events, asking them to volunteer with you and be parts of committees, helping you with things, and then build work plans to involve the neighborhood and get things done. So if any of you in a future project or program want examples of what a work plan is, I'm happy to share those with you. But a work plan is actually a project management timeline where you come up with all the steps needed to complete a project and who's going to do them and how long it's going to take and a budget, and it actually means that you get things done instead of just going repeatedly to a meeting and talking about what everybody's going to do. and then forgetting, and then coming back to the next meeting and saying, what were we going to do? I didn't, you know what we should do instead? And then never actually doing anything. And then again, communicate, communicate, communicate. Tell everybody about things. Some other things that you could do placemaking-wise with community economic development, because they really go hand in hand, is you can help brand your community. So especially those of you in Main Street communities, you may be working on this. This is an example from Old Town. We've done a festival called Old Town Oktoberfest, because Old Town, looking at our history, has a really strong German and Dutch heritage. We had more breweries than anywhere else in the city in our neighborhood, and so we started to do an Oktoberfest. And actually the person on this poster played at our first 5 Oktoberfest before he passed away. And so we actually did a poster with him on it too, which we thought was pretty cool. But branding your community, again, helps to create more of the place-based feel around it by giving you some boundaries. And I don't mean, you know, oftentimes when you're branding your community too, it doesn't necessarily mean like this road is our boundary. Our community stops right here. You know, it's more of a amorphous kind of it's a feeling. But it can help to attract people into your community too. And I will give you this one word of warning though, is branding is tough. When you are changing the name, potentially changing the feel, it gets rough. So don't ever do a logo contest. Get a professional to come in, and usually get somebody from outside your neighborhood to come in and do it, because you need someone who is completely unbiased to help. But ultimately, in the long run, hopefully it'll help to create a sense of pride and create a really strong identity. And oftentimes you do need somebody with an outside perspective, getting feedback from everybody in the community without that biased opinion to help you figure out what that is. You know, the other thing is placemaking and community economic development too oftentimes can put a business focus on things too, which often many of you you'll hear, oh, we do community development. And if you work here, I'll correct people here and say, no, we do community economic development. Because you need to have that focus on businesses as well. And as we talked a little bit about earlier, sometimes you have residents who open businesses. You could have people who are creating great spaces for those new businesses to go in. And ultimately, these new businesses can help your neighborhood as a whole as well. You know, I put a couple of examples up here of where community economic development went really bad and then went really well. One is that top one. Although I need to take a new picture because now that blue on the bottom is brick, is a pole barn. Behind it is a historic school. I used to actually live right across the street. My first house was across the street. A company came in and they initially started off communicating with the neighborhood. They were great. One of the senior management folks actually used to work here at CEDAM very briefly. And started off communicating with the neighborhood, doing all these things, went to the city to get tax incentives to build a new building, presented these plans for the new building, and then one day that building on the top right appeared. One of my friend's houses is just to the north of it. His house no longer gets sunshine. And that pole barn is not what was proposed to have been built. Because of everything that went on with this, another neighbor actually created a model of that pole barn, put it on a trailer, and parked it all around Lansing that said, what did it say, fix the pole barn? Fix the facade, Niaway, fix the facade. Parked it all around the city for several years. And a new bill passed actually in the state of Michigan that now says that a local community can revoke tax incentives after they have been awarded at the state level because of this. A different example, a much better example, another picture on the bottom is Prue's Pets. Prue's Pets is, to our knowledge, the Midwest's largest family-owned pet store. It is, for the next time you guys come into Lansing, go to Prue's. It is just a phenomenal, phenomenal resource, and the family who owns it is incredible. They decided to open up in the neighborhood. They left a smaller neighboring suburb of Lansing And their family has owned the business for more than 30 years. And they took a blighted building and decided to really try to rehab it and make it a destination, truly a destination. And holy cow, I mean, you get in and you see it, and it is amazing. So they put this waterfall on the outside and a giant mural, and there's a river that runs through the middle, and they talked to the neighborhood and said, what do you guys think about us doing this? And we all thought that they were crazy and they would never achieve it. We said, hey, go for it, and this is what they did. And it is an absolute gem for the community. I put a couple of examples up there too, but we only have 5 minutes, so I want to give some folks time for questions. So ultimately, what questions does anyone have? You're going to have more webinars in the future that touch on experts in affordable housing, in food systems, in foreclosure mitigation, in all small business development, and a bunch of the different very specific areas that we spoke about earlier. So
yeah, and that'll be part of our survey that we send out is like which of those things are you most interested in, and also you can start thinking now like after hearing this presentation, like what piques your interest and like what do you want to know more about, because that's what Ryan and I are going to try to set up for the rest of your term. But while we have Jamie, does anyone have any questions right now?
Oh, we can unmute you.
I'll unmute you, and you can also type in the text box.
The conference has been unmuted.
You're free to talk now. We can hear you well.
Remember, if you mute *7 will unmute you.
Anybody?
No?
All right, everyone's experts in community economic development now?
No. I'm looking forward to
Well, I appreciate the honesty.
I appreciate it. I'm not either. I don't think there's a lot.
Well, I am happy if you have questions after today. I am happy to answer them. Although I put my phone number up here, I am out of the office frequently, so don't hesitate to shoot me an email. That's generally the easiest way to get me. Let Rachel or Ryan know that you have a question, and they can corner me in the office. But yeah, this is, and I know this is a little bit of a difficult topic. As I mentioned, we struggle even with finding a data set or anything to measure it. That it's tough because community economic development is a little bit of everything. So ultimately, what do you need to do in your community to make it better?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for being excellent listeners. And again, you'll have a copy of these slides too in your member resources folder. You can always contact Jamie at CEDAM.info, or just shoot me or Ryan an email and we can pass along to Jamie too. That's all. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.